We're the third busiest hub in the nation, overnight. The last 5 years, our production of oil going through our backyards have tripled with no notifications to any with the town, city, or village, letting them know that, hey, look, we have all this crude oil going through your backyard. And one of the things, as being a former firefighter, is we go, how do we respond to this? How do we address this issue? 16 million gallons of fuel a week go through our backyards. Think about that. And that's just the tar sand oil and the light oil. That's not accounting for all the other hazards. How do the first responders respond to a scenario like this?
You know, how much is enough? Do you prepare enough? Have we prepared enough? Have we met enough? Have we discussed enough? We don't know. And, you know, I can tell you, being in charge of emergency management for the county, we've had a lot of sleepless nights. A few of our staffers are here today. Do we have enough foam? Don't we have enough foam? You know, and just talking to these gentlemen to my left briefly, you know, I kind of worry when they were talking about, you know, Dan said it as well, we had to have 85 fire companies come in and rotate through. 85 fire companies, I think, is the entire northeast of New York. You know, you got to have plans. You got to have mutual aid agreements. You know, I know that we have enough foam for maybe a 48, 72-hour incident. I can tell you that we've got mutual aid agreements. We've met with every state, local, and federal agency that remotely comes close to talking about rail and oil. We've met with all the fire departments along the rail lines. We have constantly had exercises. Just last week, one of our investigators spent a week down at CSX. We've got sheltering plans. We've got evacuation plans with CDTC and CDTA. Is it enough? We don't know.
Our first responders need more information. The public needs more information about what's on the rails, not just the current situation, but what could be coming in the future. That's a key tenet of what we really need to do. And we've heard it a little bit about it. We need companies who are storing and bringing this oil into our communities and the railroads to have more insurance. I think Lake Magantique in Canada would be a good example, and you'll hear more details on that. But if the companies don't have enough insurance, it's the taxpayers, it's the public that's going to bear the brunt. Not only are we bearing the brunt of the catastrophic event, but we bear the brunt of the cost of the cleanup. The Assemblywoman left, but there's a great bill making its way through the state legislature that will help that effort. And I commend her for introducing that. That's going to be a good piece. And writing to the officials and sort of requiring more disclosure about what type of insurance the railroads have, what type of insurance the oil companies have, and how much is the taxpayer going to get stuck with a bill if there's a catastrophic event, is what we're trying to avoid.
I'd like to start out by thanking the County Executive McCoy and his staff, especially Mary Rozak, for inviting us down and having us to this important conference.
On July 5th, 2013, at about 10:50 p.m., an MMA train carrying petroleum crude oil in 72 Class 111 tank cars arrived at Nantes, Quebec. In keeping with the railway's practice, the locomotive engineer parked the train for the night on a descending grade on the main track. After shutting down 4 of the 5 locomotives, the engineer applied 7 handbrakes. Railway rules require that handbrakes alone must be capable of holding a train, and this must be verified by a test. That night, however, the locomotive air brakes were left on during the test, meaning the train was being held by a combination of handbrakes and air brakes. It also gave the false impression that the handbrakes alone were enough. The engineer then contacted 2 rail traffic controllers, one in Farnham, Quebec, to let him know the train was secure, and the other in Bangor, Maine, to discuss the smoking lead locomotive and the problems it might cause for the next crew. As the smoke was expected to settle, it was agreed to leave the train as it was and deal with it the next morning. Shortly after the engineer left for the night, the Nantes Fire Department responded to a 911 call of a fire on the train. Firefighters extinguished the blaze on the lead locomotive by shutting off the fuel. Then, following railway instructions, they turned off the electrical breakers. After discussing the situation with the rail traffic controller in Farnham and an MMA employee who had been dispatched to the scene, everyone departed. With all the locomotives shut down, the air brake system began to lose pressure, and the brakes gradually became less and less effective. About an hour later, just before 1 a.m., the air pressure dropped to a point where the combination of air brakes and hand brakes could no longer hold the train. The train then began to roll downhill toward Lac Mégantic, 7 miles away. As it moved down the grade, the train picked up speed, reaching a top speed of 65 miles per hour. The train derailed just past the Frontenac Street crossing. Almost all of the derailed tank cars were damaged, many of them from large breaches, and about 6 million liters of crude oil began pouring into the streets. The fire began almost immediately, and the ensuing blaze and explosions left 47 people dead. Another 2,000 citizens were forced from their homes, and much of the downtown core was destroyed.
Okay, so that's what happened that fateful morning. So the equipment that derailed included 63 of the 72 tank cars, as well as the buffer car. 9 tank cars at the rear of the train remained on the track, and they were able to be pulled away by the Mégantic Fire Department. When they arrived, they grabbed a front-end loader and were able to pull it away. And this is shortly after the main event begins, and you can see the 9 cars are right there, and there's the last car with the red light on indicating the end of the train. They were able to disconnect those and pull them away. Almost all the derailed tank cars were damaged, and about 6 million liters of petroleum crude oil, which amounts for us 1.5 million gallons, was quickly released, and a fire and subsequent explosion began almost immediately. So now I'm going to walk you through some of the pictures. These are pictures from Mégantic Fire Department and the people in the village. These are not my pictures. These are the pictures of what they saw the first 4 hours. When Chief Dennis Lazoon from the Mégantic Fire Department, when they got the call came in as a house fire. And he got up and he was getting dressed, and his wife looked out the window and she said, "Denny, the whole town's on fire." And he said, "No, it must just be a bad fire." She said, "No, the whole town's on fire." And he went to the window and he looked, and that's what he was able to see. That in fact, the whole town did look like it was on fire. The first explosion, petroleum product, occurred almost immediately within a few minutes of the actual derailment. And you'll notice that you'll see the common denominator, and with the backing oil, their explosions and plume clouds all look alike. They had a second explosion around 3:10 a.m., and a third explosion had followed the final explosion. And this is the video of it kind of occurring. So then, the aftermath of the explosions. It destroyed 6 city blocks, burned, incinerated everything in its path. The oil ran like canola oil does. It doesn't look like grape jelly like everybody thinks crude oil does. Ran down through the city streets because Mégantic's on a hill, ran down into the sewer systems, and at the second, third explosion, ruptured their water system, blew up, destroyed their hydrant system. They lost their hydrants, they lost their telephones, they lost their power systems, and this is July 6th, Canada Day weekend. They're trying to evacuate 4,000 people to get them out of the area, unknown amount of people, and this goes on for 6 city blocks. This is what it looked like. This is what will happen in your community if this happens not in a remote area, but in the downtown district.
Hopefully, this information I give you today will not only help the county, but will help the first responders in the New York area to help prepare for the event of a derailment in their community. Lynchburg Fire Department, we're a all-career department, founded about 1883 in April. We have 8 stations, 3 shifts, 2 battalions, 1 EMS supervisor. We work a 24-hour work shift. We have 8 advanced life support engine companies, 2 truck companies, 1 heavy rescue, 7 advanced life support medic units, and a urban search and rescue and hazmat team. Now, this is not a huge department as far as the fire service goes, but it's a good-sized department that's not too out of line with communities such as yours or communities surrounding this area. I want you to keep this in mind because on the day of the derailment, this entire department was depleted. So this is a little view of downtown Lynchburg, some of the buildings we have. This derailment occurred on a Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock in April. That's a children's museum that was occupied. This is a restaurant with offices above it for architectural engineering firms. It was occupied. This is a downtown park area with residential and commercial buildings downtown, residential buildings downtown, all occupied. It was it was Wednesday afternoon, 2 o'clock. This is what it looked like when you got there. You can see the devastation of the train cars derailing. If you've ever seen a derailment, it is unbelievable the amount of destruction that will take place when the train derails, the amount of energy expended. It just destroys everything in its path. As Chief Pellerin was saying, you'll find pieces of train for as far as you can see because it'll just scatter the cars, the wheels, the brake parts, everything as far as you can see. If you go across the river into the adjacent county, you will be able to get a view of the site, and this was from across the river, and you can see the product was actually burning on top of the river. Okay, so what lessons did we learn as a fire department in the city of Lynchburg? Again, I showed you our department, what our department consists of. Good-sized department, internationally accredited, ISO 2. We've got a good thing going. We were overwhelmed. Initially, we exhausted all of our resources that we had in the city of Lynchburg. So going out and telling folks our story, I will say that it's going to be highly unlikely that smaller communities are going to be able to handle these things. So you're going to need to get some help in to help you manage this, whether it is coming to the scene and helping you with scene management, or whether it is backfilling your stations and running the additional calls for service. Because again, we had a train derailment, but we still had calls for EMS, we still had car accidents, we still had fire alarms, we still had things of that nature we had to take care of.
What you come away from a conference like this is, if you can learn something you can take with you, and I've just been through listening to 2 great presentations here that I've been learning a lot from. And I wish to thank the County of Albany, especially the county executive and Mary, for putting this together, so that I hope that we all learn something from this. And as I go through my presentation, you'll see how similar it is, but totally different. We did a plume assessment here, and we said within 1 hour, the smoke will cover this much area. In 4 hours, that plume is going to cover a little bit more, and we're concerned about the toxic fumes and all what's going on. In 12 hours, it was covering a larger area. And in 24 hours, it would have been like this. Now, the EPA was one of the first on the scene, and they started doing air quality samples. And they determined that there was no problem as far as the people on the ground being affected by any of the smoke. We set up the incident management system, and a unified command was established. This was a great thing because there were so many people on the scene, we had to have some type of coordination between what was going on. The unified command, we had the US EPA, we had the Illinois EPA, myself, with Galena and the fire department there, and the BNSF Railroad. We were meeting 2 and 3 times a day to determine what needed to be done. BNSF Railroad brought in their own fire department, their own hazmat team, their own police department. They set all that up. We had set up a perimeter with our chief, and we started credential, having everybody that drives sign in and sign out. We started getting well controlled. By Sunday night, we had it under control as to who was going in, what equipment was coming in, and who was assigned to it. And then we continued meeting so that everybody knew what was going to be going on during the day, how it was staged, and who was responsible for it. Some of the things we were looking for as far as recovery: extinguish the fire. They had to vacuum out the crude oil from the impacted cars. They removed the damaged cars from the site, evacuate contaminated soils from ballast, replace damaged track, and resume track operations. There was 100 trains backed up. They replaced over 800 feet of track, one switch, and one bridge within 36 hours. They did not want those trains backed up. As you said, it costs $1 million an hour. And over that particular section of track, we asked what runs across here. They said everything in your house and your business, some material runs across this track other than oil. It's one of the busiest tracks that go through Illinois. As far as oil goes, we were running 55 trains a day, or a week. So 55 unit trains per week, each one containing 105 cars or more, each one 1 million gallons of oil. We're famous for our tourism, but we're also famous because we have more trains go through our county than anybody else. So we have to be much more aware of what goes on. They had to empty and clean the cars. They had to, it just went on and on what needed to be done. And then they said, well, we have to make sure the environment is safe. So it started on March 5th. As you can see, we had a lot of fireballs, and once again, it was just burned out. But when BNSF got there with their firemen, they decided that they were going to be lead on it, and they went in and started working it. Here you can see where there's a little berm built. That berm was actually built by the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard arrived, and they said, what's the Coast Guard doing here? And he says, well, you're on the Mississippi River. Anything that has to do with the river, Coast Guard's involved. Remediation plan components, there was a lot of things going on all the time because they had to put this all back together. They can't just leave it there. And they were told that when they finished, that area is going to be exactly like it was. And so they thought, okay, we'll put this soil back and we'll have a nice little grassy area. They were told, the railroad was told, that it has to be a Class D marshland, just like it was, because there's a lot of wildlife refuges right around there. It's a beautiful area, and there's a lot of animals and all this. So they just couldn't go in there and make it a grassy area. They had to come back and say it's a Class D wetland. And that's what's happening now. They've done everything they have had to do, but they have stopped everything because now the Army Corps of Engineers is coming back to see what they've done, to make sure it's all in place, and then they'll go ahead and finish up.
I'm very pleased to be here in Albany. I've worked with Albany citizens and local officials for many, many months after Lac Megantic, and even with some people for years before that. So it's wonderful to be able to put a face on people that I've worked with by telephone and by email for a long time. And I'm especially happy to be in Albany, where there's such a wonderful degree of citizen activism about the crude oil issues, and where County Executive McCoy has been such a terrific leader on that issue. I think it's fair to say, I mean, I've worked with many groups around the country, in Washington State, in California, in Virginia, in New Jersey. I think it's probably fair to say that Mr. McCoy has been more active and vigorous on this issue than any other local official in the country. And so Albany is very lucky. At-risk citizens are being kept in the dark about these risks. We have 2 community right-to-know laws. It is un-American. Congress has spoken. Americans deserve to know what risks they're exposed to. It is un-American to keep citizens in the dark and keep them at very high risk and not tell them what you know about those risks. But the railroads got themselves exempted from both of our major federal right-to-know laws. They've said that the trains can bring crude oil unit trains through cities at 40 miles per hour through most of the country. I'm sorry, through 50 miles per hour through most of the country and 40 miles per hour through the high-threat urban areas. But the main safety expert, Carl Alexi, from the FRA, said last April, when you start to look at cars that are derailing at speeds of 30 to 40 miles per hour, it's very difficult to expect that a tank car to get hit and not be breached. The message is you can't build a tank car strong enough to withstand punctures at 30 to 40 miles per hour. And this is for the top guy at the FRA. So the railroads are willing to actually tolerate, as a cost of doing business, a certain number of derailments and breaches at the speeds that they are now insisting on. Excuse me. So why is that? Well, the railroad said, look, we're willing to slow our crude oil trains down to 40 miles per hour and 50 miles per hour to the rest of the country. But if we slow down our crude oil trains anymore, we'll also slow down other kinds of trains, lumber and steel and grain, et cetera. And he said, and this is the president of the AAR, he says to this big audience of federal experts, our biggest single customer, we want you to know, is UPS. If we slow down UPS's trains, they'll go back to truck. Does anybody out here want that?
As I understand it, several members of this esteemed panel have toured the Port of Albany yesterday, or at least over the past few days, the Selkirk rail yards. I was just curious if you have any impressions based on your experience with your own tragedies looking at our infrastructure, anything that pops out at you, either that is advantageous to Albany or where we could be experiencing real problems. Thanks.
If you go anywhere in the country, I think you'll see this. Railroads running close to downtown, railroads running through downtown, railroads running near residential communities. But I think this particular forum and the concern I've seen, not only from the county executive and sheriff, his staff, and then the community, I think that's the main thing that Albany's got going for it.
I mentioned, is there a time frame like from when one of these tank cars ruptured to the fire, the explosions happened? You have an idea? I know it kind of looked like in your video, it seemed pretty quickly for the people that are living there, like myself. I'm just up the hill to be able to get out before we incinerate it.
As soon as the car breaches, if there's an ignition source, be it heat or be it sparks from the derailment, that's it. There's no derail and layover for a little bit and then ignite. It's usually going to be instantaneous as soon as there's an ignition source introduced into the area.
Thank you. Galena, our first response, our first notification was at 1:46 p.m. Because of the misinformation we had in getting there. When we finally narrowed it down, the fireball did not erupt until approximately 2 hours later. We were told there was white smoke coming up. So that was our first response, was the white smoke, and then later came the fireball.
I'm very pleased to be here in Albany. I've worked with Albany citizens and local officials for many, many months after Lac Megantic, and even with some people for years before that. So it's wonderful to be able to put a face on people that I've worked with by telephone and by email for a long time. And I'm especially happy to be in Albany, where there's such a wonderful degree of citizen activism about the crude oil issues, and where County Executive McCoy has been such a terrific leader on that issue. I think it's fair to say, I mean, I've worked with many groups around the country, in Washington State, in California, in Virginia, in New Jersey. I think it's probably fair to say that Mr. McCoy has been more active and vigorous on this issue than any other local official in the country. And so Albany is very lucky. And it's good to see other parts of the state government picking up on that as well, and trying to ask more information out of the railroads, for example, which is a key question.